Good morning, folks. We'll just wait probably just one more minute for people to arrive in the virtual room. There's currently about 40 people here, and I think we're still waiting on a few more. Okay, it's 1 past the hour, 11 o'clock. My name is Aidan Barker. I'm the Manager for Government Stakeholder Engagement here at AMO in Western Australia, and I welcome you to this morning's 2025 WA Gas Statement of Opportunities webinar. And thank you all for coming today. I'm sure people will continue to come in as we go through our opening remarks. Firstly, Wanju, Kaya, welcome. Hello, I see you. Want to acknowledge the traditional owners on the land we meet, the Whadjuk Noongar Boodja, Whadjuk Noongar land, and also traditional owners across Australia, air, land, and sea. Acknowledge the wisdom of the elders, past, present, and emerging. Certainly something that AMO takes very, very seriously. And just want to note also we're heading into or are in Birak, which is first summer, the beginning of the hot season, as all of you would know, when things start changing. The Muja or Australian Christmas tree starts flowering, and people start to meet. And with that, I will go through into our next slide just by way of introduction. Most of you would have seen this before. AMO and competition law meeting protocol. In short, the do's and don'ts. Do please keep the topic of conversation relevant to this session. Do not do anything your lawyers wouldn't want you to do. And also, if you see something, say something. If you feel like somebody is acting counter to this meeting protocol, please do call it out. In terms of things, and really the key thing you ought not to do is talk about confidential information relating to your business as part of this session. So thank you very much. And also, this is one now that I think, are all pretty familiar with. So just by way of protocol for today's meeting, please keep your microphone off during the presentation, unless, of course, you are speaking, in which case we'd love you to turn it on. Please keep your camera off as well, as it can be a little bit distracting for the presenters and others, but we'd love to see you when you're talking during the Q&A, and we'll remind you to turn your camera on. We are using the Q&A function for today's session, so you'll see up the top of your Teams screen, next to the chat button, there's a little Q&A button there as well, where you can put your questions. If they're easy, straightforward, we may answer them in the chat. Otherwise, we'll hold them over until the end of the session where we have made time for Q&A. This meeting is going to be recorded for the purpose of creating minutes, and I think will also be publicly available on our website. And of course, we always welcome feedback, and we've got our email address there to provide it. So without further ado, I will hand over to Katie McKenzie, our Group Manager for WA System Design and Transformation, who will be taking us through the presentation today. Oh, sorry, just bear with us. All right.
Thanks, Aidan. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay.
We can hear you.
Great. Well, thanks so much for joining us today. Happy WA GSOO Day. It's a very exciting day in our calendar. For most of you, you'd already be familiar with what the GSOO is, but I'll give a little bit of background for those that are a bit less familiar. First of all, just to talk about our role in the gas market in WA. So AEMO has a relatively limited role in the WA gas market. We develop the GSOO Outlook annually, and we also operate the Gas Bulletin Board, which is a platform where gas market participants can provide information to the market. So, WA GSOO is a big one for us in the gas space. We've moved to a 20-year forecast of gas supply adequacy to inform potential industry investments and policy development. As part of this, we undertake scenario analysis to explore a range of plausible futures regarding economic growth, decarbonisation, consumer behaviours, policy coordination and supply development. We use three main scenarios in the 2025 WA GSOO. There's slower growth, step change, and accelerated transition. So slower growth is our low case, step change is our central modelling scenario, and accelerated transition is our high case and reflects an increase in the ambition of our decarbonisation efforts. All of the scenarios assume at least a 43% reduction in greenhouse gases nationally through to 2030 and net zero by 2050. The step change scenario assumes that only projects that already exist are committed via a final investment decision having been made or are anticipated as a high level of planning and approvals has already been achieved. Okay, over to the next one. Thanks, Aidan. This year, we've included a number of improvements addressing recommendations from the inquiry into the WA domestic gas policy or DONG gas policy and further uplifts as part of AEMO's commitment to continuous improvement. So as I mentioned, the big one this year is the extension of the outlook period from 10 years to 20 years. Also, the inclusion of forecast decarbonisation pathways to cover the state's transition towards net zero. We have the integration of gas and electricity planning and forecasting through our improved infrastructure adequacy assessment, and we've enhanced our supply assessment as well to very much focus on the risk side of things. Our key findings in this year's GSOO, so the forecast is that will remain broadly balanced in the near term with structural supply gaps expected to emerge from 2030. We see there being peakier and more seasonal gas demand from gas power generators, placing pressure on gas infrastructure. And without appropriate mitigations, there is a risk of gas peak demand exceeding maximum flow limits on the Dampier to Bunbury natural gas pipeline under certain conditions. New investment will likely be needed, and a combination of solutions will likely be required in the long term to maintain supply adequacy, including investment in new sources of supply and infrastructure. So now they're sort of the high level messages, but let's dig a little bit deeper into the forecast. So this is our forecast domestic gas market balance. We're seeing similar dynamics playing out to last year's forecast. The market is broadly in balance to 2028, followed by a period of uncertainty as consumption is forecast to grow, while new supply projects lag that forecast growth. From 2030 onwards, we have a widening supply gap as natural gas reserves continue to deplete faster than the rate at which consumption declines over time. Compared to last year, the biggest change has been lowering of annual consumption forecasts, which we'll explore on the next slide. Gas consumption is projected to increase to 2030, and that's largely driven by the commencement of Perdaman's Karratha urea project and other mining, minerals processing and industrial projects. From 2031, gas consumption is projected to decline steadily, driven by the combined impacts of electrification and also reduced annual gas power generation output on the Southwest Interconnected System as the electricity sector decarbonises. Compared to last year, consumption forecasts are lower, and that's due to the sustained closures of nickel and lithium operations, the permanent closure of Alcoa's Kwinana refinery, and a more subdued growth profile of iron ore. Moving on to the supply side. So supply is forecast to grow in the near term to 2027 with the introduction of Scarborough project in the second half of 2026. Supply peaks in 2029 as Waitsia Stage 2 begins producing for the domestic market and as two other projects are anticipated to enter the market, so West Erregulla and Lockyer. If projects classified by us as uncertain, so those bars in yellow there, if they're developed, the supply forecast would increase to about 1,400 TJs a day in 2035. The long-term downward trend is attributed to natural reserve depletion from existing mature gas fields and also from the new sources of supply as well. So on this slide, you see all three consumption scenarios. The key takeaway is really that under all three consumption scenarios, those solid lines running through, we dip into the yellow uncertain supply category, meaning more supply beyond just those anticipated projects is going to be needed to meet forecast gas consumption under all scenarios. Development of uncertain sources of gas supply, so for example, Ocean Hill, Equus, Browse, is a way to support gas supply adequacy over the long term. However, it's not only more supply that will be needed, but also flexibility around production of supply as well, and the supporting infrastructure for that too, to mitigate seasonal supply gaps and peak day shortfalls, which we'll dig into a little more on the next slide. It's a pretty busy slide. I guess the key takeout is while annual gas consumption from Southwest Interconnected System gas power generation is projected to decrease over the long term, we are seeing that annual consumption decreasing over the long term as we see greater contributions from renewables coupled with storage. We are seeing volatility in peak GPG gas demand increasing over time. This is driven by the forecast increase in Swiss power demand and increase in the weather dependency that comes with those renewables projects. The winter seasons typically exhibits the highest gas power generation gas demand levels and volatility, with residential heating load electrifying and the greater reliance that's placed on GPG during the shorter winter daylight hours. Go over to the next slide. So we've assessed the risk of pipeline infrastructure potentially constraining the delivery of gas to gas users, and we've found that without mitigations, at times of high gas demand in the metro and southwest regions, the pipeline infrastructure is at risk of constraining gas delivery from 2029. And that becomes more pronounced and consistent, or it's forecast to become more pronounced and consistent in the winter months when gas power generation demand is highest and most volatile. In the period to 2027, there is still a risk, but it's manageable through operational measures such as drawing down on line pack. From 2028, there may be the need for some sort of relatively minor infrastructure upgrades, really around sort of compressor rewheeling. But from 2035, there needs to be more substantive response. So whether that is looking at more flexible operational measures, policies or investments across either the gas or the electricity sectors. As you well know, when it comes to these forecasts, there are uncertainties that could play out over the outlook period. There's still uncertainty around coal supply availability and potential changes that may shift reliance onto gas. So that's not just in the gas power generation space, but also current major users of coal supply. Demand could increase if the pace or variability of renewable energy development slows or if supporting infrastructure is delayed. Timing and delivery of new gas supply projects could widen forecast supply gaps, with risk increased by projects in the Perth Basin, where geology is proving to be a bit more complex. There is limited supply flexibility in the market, with gas production facilities operating at close to maximum capacity. So outages of larger gas plants may result in more near-term or short-term supply shortfalls. If we saw earlier ramp up of new gas consumption projects, then we may see those supply gaps widen. So, for example, if Perdaman's urea project was to ramp up sooner than assumed in the forecasts, and of course, generally the risk of demand reduction or destruction, particularly for gas price sensitive industries. So as part of the formal information requests that we did, we looked at, what the possible impacts would be with changes in price, and the indication was that you may see possible impacts from approximately $10 per gigajoule. We've learnt from previous sessions that there are often lots of questions posed in these sessions, and you may have seen that today we've put up the answers from the last WA Gas Consultative Forum for you to take a look at, but we very much wanted to leave a substantial amount of time for Q&A. So I'm going to hand over to Aidan to facilitate the Q&A, and we'll get stuck in.
Okay, thank you very much for the presentation, Katie. We actually don't have any questions yet in the Q&A on Teams, but seeing as there's 94 people in the room, I'm pretty positive that there is one. So if you're itching and haven't had the chance to type it down, I do encourage you to put your hand up now, and there's an opportunity to ask Katie and the rest of the GSOO team a question.
So apparently the Q&A is off.
Okay, but the chat is obviously not. So please do throw your questions into the chat. As actually Pete Milne has done. So Pete, I'll throw over to you to ask your question around our assumptions and modelling outcomes. Pete. Pete might not have access to a microphone. So Pete Milne said that Gorgon's assumed to supply 274 TJs a day to 2045. He's asking how it's justified given that this is a fixed volume, i.e. not 15%, read the domestic gas obligation, they'll be satisfied in about 2037.
Yeah, I can jump in there.
Yeah, so I'll just introduce you first, Alex. So thank you very much for turning on your mic. Alex Uhansky is our manager for WA Future System Planning and Forecasting. So over to you, Alex.
Thanks, Aidan. And apologies, my camera's off today. I'm just feeling a bit rubbish this morning. But in terms of the answer to your question, Pete, I will also just ask Greg Sims, who's on the call in our supply forecasting team, just to add anything to the answer here as relevant. The starting point for our forecasts, for our supply forecasts, is the formal information requests that we receive back from the market. So that's really the starting point for this one, and we've got assumptions around sort of the domestic market obligation as part of that as well. Greg, I was wondering if I could probably go on a little bit more, but
Yeah,
I was wondering if
sure.
at this point you wanted to sort of step in and add a bit more flavour around that.
I can just make a couple of comments. I mean, we do recognise that there's a existing 2,000 petajoule existing domestic market state obligation in relation to Gorgon State Agreement. But what we've done for our forecast is made an assumption that 15% domestic market obligation applies to backfill fields that will be potentially brought online to backfill Gorgon. So that's basically the basis.
Yeah, Greg, I've got my audio working now. Look, I've just got to say, for a base case, that just seems just commercially and politically really baseless, basically. Because that depends on either the company or the government taking unprecedented economic or political action.
Yeah, okay. So
I mean,
you probably have to expand on it.
But basically, once your obligation's gone, and you're assuming that Gorgon's going to still pump up almost 300 TJs a day, that only happens in two scenarios. One, all the partners unilaterally, voluntarily decide to sell gas at a much lower price than they get LNG, or the government has changed the Barrow Island Act, or the gas price is stratospherically high that there's no loss to supply the market, in which case you need to get matching demand numbers, which will be a lot lower. It just doesn't work as a base case.
I can add a little bit further to that around our assumptions, which is that we do see with the backfill fields to Gorgon, there is a degree of commercial alignment. So that's the point one. Maybe sort of the further back you go, the further backfill you go, there's more maybe uncertainty in relation to that alignment.
There's no shortage of gas. There's no shortage of gas. They're going to export it. They're not going to supply us. That's what they're here for.
So the second point I was going to make is, unfortunately, with in our position with that as AEMO, we don't have visibility in relation to the negotiations that take place with the state government. So that is maybe a question that could be addressed by DEED if they're available to do that online.
I understand that, but your base case should be that the obligation is met and nothing else happens, and a supply upside is that supply continues.
Sorry.
I've
got one further addition, which is the basis for our supply forecasts are that we're flagging or indicating the potential supply that's available to the market. So that's our premise, and so in other words, we're not taking into account commercial constraints and government and domestic market obligation constraints as far as negotiations outcomes go. So I guess that's the position that we have in relation to the premise for the forecast. Right. Sorry, Katie, to interrupt you.
No, but that's okay. Thanks very much, Greg. Look, Pete, we take your point on board. Obviously, as we work through the GSOO development process, we are flagging what our assumptions are and testing those with industry and government as we go along. We recognise that there's all sorts of uncertainties over the outlook period, and I guess if we bring it back to key messages here, it's the need for more supply from 2030, 2031. And so I think that, part of the GSOO is to give that sort of view of what's going to be needed. And then there's an opportunity for government to work with producers around that side of things. it's certainly something we can take on board for next year's GSOO.
Okay, well, thanks very much to you all for your responses.
Yeah, thanks, Pete.
Thanks, Pete. Okay, so there's a few other questions in the chat, but before I get onto them, there is somebody who's been waiting in the crowd with their hand up for a little while. So Steve, whose last name is not in there. Steve, with your hand up. Do you want to ask your question?
Hi there, yeah. Steve Lewis, Bright Source Consulting. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can
So
hear
my
you.
question is about reconciling your forecast with the domestic gas statement, which is kind of tangential to what we've just discussed. But if you look at the domestic gas statement, there's a chronic shortage of supply from next year right through till 2030. And I just wondered if you had reconciled the two forecasts.
Alex, did you want to jump in there?
I can jump in there. So that I'd be interested just to, even if not now, maybe after the call, Steve, just sort of compare notes around the numbers you're seeing there. But to answer your question, we do. So we do that reconciliation or that sort of calibration check against our supply forecast versus what comes out in the domestic gas statement. And in a couple of instances, we've applied, sort of small uplifts to our forecast, just representing again that they are intended to be potential supply forecasts according to the methodology that's in the report. So where we do see, in some cases slightly higher volumes coming out of the domestic gas statement, then we seek to reconcile and reflect those in our potential supply forecast as well. But if you are seeing a difference there, keen to have a look at that after the session.
Yeah, I'm happy to send them through. I think the key thing is your supply forecast, as you've said before, is what could be supplied. The domestic gas statement is what the sellers intend to supply. And what they intend to supply is a lot lower than what you have forecast could be supplied. So kind of then that works around a price, essentially. If the price is higher, then more gas is going to be supplied. But if I have a look at Varanus Island in particular, 220 dropping to 120 within 4 years on the domestic gas statement, I'm just not sure that's reflected in your numbers. And if it's not, then the supply shortage is a lot more pronounced, a lot more quickly than maybe your forecast. But I'm happy to take it offline with you.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. And possibly, and so with Varanus, so we do have depletion of reserves occurring across our forecast. It may not be immediately obvious from the slides you've seen today, just because the various projects are lumped together. But happy to look at that in a little bit more detail, as we can.
No worries. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Steve. So look, some of those, well, the last couple of questions do actually go to the actual purpose of the GSOO and some of its constraints as well. So I'll open that maybe to Katie to talk to as we go along if those issues come up again. But in terms of the next cab off the rank, we've got Scott Ashton. So Scott, you've got a question around assumptions regarding West Arugala. Scott, do you want to speak to that? Okay, so I might speak for Scott. So Scott's asked why West Arugala is not lumped in with uncertain projects like Ocean Hill and Corvus, given that there's no FID for it yet.
Yeah, I can answer that as well, Hayden, and then I might just pass to either Greg or Sandy just to sort of elaborate. This really goes to, and appreciate the report was just released this morning, so may not have had a chance to look at this particular one. We do talk about anticipated projects in our report where, such as West Arugala, where they have been assessed according to assessment criteria for inclusion as to whether they are, in that anticipated case, if they have enough certainty, or if they don't have enough certainty, they are placed in the uncertain supply category. So for West Arugala, there's a bit of a section in the report just with regards to the latest developments and progress for that project. But essentially, we look at approvals, environmental approvals, not necessarily just FID, but if it is advanced enough from a planning and approvals perspective, we also consider that for inclusion under the anticipated supply forecast.
Okay, I'm not sure whether Scott's still online, but I'll take that question as having been answered. And the next one's from Piers Verstegen. Piers, do you want to ask your question around LNG feedstock forecasts?
It's okay. I think you can read it. Why are LNG feedstock forecasts not included in this year's GSOO like previous versions?
Okay, I'll answer that one as well. We did actually get a similar question along these same lines as a supplementary question coming out of the last GCF, which we have, and again, appreciating you wouldn't have had a chance to look at it yet, which has been uploaded this morning on the GCF website. So in short, it is included. So it's under the consumption and demand chapter. I think towards the bottom of that chapter, we've got LNG feedstock included there. So have a look at that, Piers. If that's still not quite sort of hitting the mark for you, do let me know, and we can look at that again.
Yeah, no, thanks. I saw that. It's just in the previous versions, you've had that table at the end with aggregated feedstock across all the facilities. That was quite useful. And I was looking forward to seeing the 20-year outlook on that, but that's not in this year's version. So we have to manually work it out, I suppose, from the data you're talking about.
Okay. Look, I'm not sure exactly which table you're referring to from previous versions, but if you wouldn't mind, there's an email at the bottom of this pack about this presentation. But by all means, just send us an email, and if you are having to do sort of those manual workarounds, let us know, because if we can do that more efficiently or quicker than you, we're happy to have a look at that.
Thank you.
Thanks for that, Piers. And there's another question from Scott Ashton. I will just read it out. So Scott's asking if we can please elaborate on the constraints re the DBNGP. Separately, is just jumped in the chat, is WA GSOO factoring in any supply from potential future Canning Basin projects? I'll throw that one over to you again, Alex.
Yep. So I might throw that one to Greg on our side, if you're okay, Greg, because you've been sort of working across both the infrastructure and the supply forecast. I think that the question touches across both.
Yeah, so maybe I can answer maybe I'll start with the Canning Basin. So Canning Basin, fairly immature at this point in time. Projects, we're monitoring progress of projects there, but we've seen that there's insufficient progress to actually bring anything substantive into the forecasts. So we're monitoring that. It's obviously got potential, but subject to fracking issues and things like that need to be approved. So as far as constraints, maybe do you mind repeating the first part of the question, because I may not have picked that up correctly? So can you please elaborate on the constraints read DBNGP? Could you please expand on that question a little? If Scott's available.
Yeah, I'm not sure Scott has access to his microphone, so
okay.
might just leave that one for now, unless Scott is able to ask it later on. And move on to our next question. So next question is from Mia Davies. Mia, do you want to speak to this? It's around the timing of the release of the GSOO.
All right, thank you. It's not a detailed question. It's just wondering why it had been pushed back from Wednesday to today. And then further down the list, it was curious to me that the media seemed to have access to all of this information before industry players.
I can answer the second question first, and then I might throw over to my colleague Katie for the first. So in terms of the West receiving it and media more generally, it's common practice for us to provide embargoed copies of reports such as the GSOO to media outlets before it provides an opportunity for informed reporting at the time of the report's actual release, and also for them to ask questions to inform that reporting. And it is usual practice for both government and AEMO, and also, might I add, industry as well, to do that. In terms of the first question, Katie, do you want to respond to that? Or alternatively, we've also got our Executive General Manager online.
Yeah, no, thanks, Aidan. So in terms of the decision to move it out by 2 days, we had consulted with the Coordinator of Energy on the potential to move it, really to enable us to have more time to engage on some of the aspects of the GSOO prior to publication.
Okay, we'll move on to the next one. Piers, again, do you want to speak to this? It's a rather long question.
Sorry, it's not really a question. It's just more a follow-up to Peter's point about the domestic obligations from Gorgon. And yeah, I mean, you're projecting more gas to come from Gorgon than the existing domestic obligation. But if you actually look at it in aggregate over all the LNG producers, you're projecting a lot less than 15% to come from LNG facilities in aggregate. I think it was around 11% last year. So, and that looks to be the case across the whole outlook period. So I know that you get those numbers from DEED, and it just reflects what the facilities are saying that they're going to produce, or what government thinks that they're going to require. But it seems like if you actually did, or if the government were to enforce that 15% on an annual basis, that would pretty much close the entire shortfall, at least for the next decade. So it was just a comment, really, and I think it reflects on, it might be good to provide a little bit more transparency around your methodology for what you're expecting to come from these LNG producers, because it takes a bit of number crunching to get to the bottom of it.
Okay, so like you said, Piers, I'll take that more generally as a comment. In terms of our methodology and the information that provided, always happy to take comments and suggestions on board. So with that, we'll probably go to the next question from Pete Milne. So Pete, your question's around Waitsia.
Yeah. You look. Thanks, Adam. I might just be looking in the wrong spot, but I can't find the backdated data that's been put up on the GBB concerning Waitsia. The report mentions a MLVL7 delivery point. I can't find that anywhere in the reports. Am I looking in the wrong spot?
We can help you find that Pete.
Yeah.
I think it's under the large gas users report. I won't share my screen just now.
No.
But look, we can help you find that. It is definitely there.
Okay.
But yeah, we can point to that. If you just send us an email, we'll make that visible for you.
Will do. Thank you very much.
Okay. Before I get to the next question from the chat, Scott Ashton, you've got your hand up. But unfortunately, your microphone doesn't work. Scott, we might wait on that. Again, if you want to throw your question in the chat and provide a little bit more elaboration on the second part of your question that you had before, we'll endeavour to answer it. Yeah, sorry, I can't hear you. Okay, Christopher Meredith, your question was next.
Yeah, hi. Hey, Alex, Katie. I just wanted a quick question. I accidentally answered Pete Milne's question, I think. So you've added the KGP to the Gas Bulletin Board as a large consumer. I can see it there in the report, but there's only data from November 2025. So Waitier's been exporting LNG for what, about 18 months through swaps. So why can't we see that data on the GBB just for completeness sake? And I suppose a follow-up that is not on there is, you said in the notes quite late on in the GSOO that all the data you have for LNG export from Waitier has been got from Beach reports. You have got nothing from Mitsui. Can you ask why you haven't got accurate data, given his historic data and it's domestic gas being diverted, why that can't be included in your requests to the companies, please?
Yep, I'll answer the second part of that question first, and then the first part. If we do still have possibly either Hamish or Dieter online, just members of our WAGBB team would probably be best placed to sort of round out that answer, particularly for the first part. But in terms of what's in the GSOO and the public information that we relied on, we have just relied on that public information from Beach. So it wasn't sort of part of any formal information request or anything like that. It's just based on public ASX announcements and reporting that we've used for that one. I guess, and that was performed, those that have calculations were performed in the absence of the full data set being sort of available and uploaded on the GBB. As for the GBB, I can't see all the attendees right now, but Hamish or Dieter, were you online for that one?
Hi, Alex. Probably I can add something. Can you hear me? Sorry.
Yes, we can.
Yep. Sorry. So for the Carta gas plan is registered as large user in GBB, I think from memory 12th of November. And the way the GBB registration is not allowing us for the backdated. So that's the earliest date that we can provide. And then for the WATSIA itself, we have the MLVL7 connection point now. It's not visible on the map, but we have the number aggregated on the report, and we have the data backdated from 1st of October 2023. I think Alex mentioned that we will send email regarding where is the right place to find the MLVL7 aggregated number on the report.
But you're not going to send out the data. You say you've got it from October 23, but because of the registration, you can't put it on until it's been registered. There's no way of releasing that as a file or something just to show the data so that we can put the numbers together ourselves.
So the GBB itself, for the report, it's aggregate by zone, and it's also because we have reason for that. It also relates on the confidentiality data. So we cannot just give that number specifically published on the GBB. That's from
every large consumer has its numbers published on the GBB daily.
For the Carta gas plan, we have the number after their registration as large user, but before that, it's aggregated on another report by zone, if that helps.
So you don't have the individual data points going back to when it started taking domestic gas from the system and exporting it?
We have from 1st October 2023 for MLVL7 delivery, but it's aggregated by zone. That's how GBB published the report.
Just means the answer is do the math and then do the offset and you'll get the answer.
Yes.
Yeah, I might call time on this question. If there is further questions or where we can point you to additional information, we've got that email there, and I'm very happy to respond to any queries that people may have. So another question from question from Dominic Rodwell. So a query as to why we don't have a separate section for big batteries supporting renewables in the Swiss. Katie, you just threw your camera on there, and I don't know whether you want to respond to this one.
I was going to, but actually I see that Christian's online and keen to respond. So over to you, Christian.
Great.
Ron, so you can see me. So I can see there's pretty much two parts of your question. So the first one about big batteries and a separate section for big batteries. We do have battery development, which was captured in the Swiss GPG modeling part of the GSOO. And the Swiss GPG modeling was basically a Swiss capacity expansion modeling exercise where we look at how much capacity of different types might be needed in the Swiss up to 2045 to make sure that Swiss demand is covered. We model the expansion of large-scale and distributed battery capacity. So we both have the batteries, the likes of Kwinana ESR or Corley ESR, but also distributed or VPP virtual power plant batteries. And we provide details on the capacity and the output of these batteries in the GSOO report and in the data register. And details about the methodology are provided in EY's modeling methodology report. So I think that hopefully covers the first part of your question. And on the second part of your question, what we see from the modeling is that despite batteries playing a crucial role in supporting the uptake of renewables, gas power generation is still needed for firming renewables over extended periods of dark and still conditions. In such periods, storage may become unavailable, meaning it will have discharged and it might not be able to recharge again. And in these periods, GPG will be required to generate at high output for multiple hours or days. We have an illustration of what that might look like in figure 14 of the GSOO, where we show July 2035, and GPG is operating for about 30 hours at very high output consistently. We also discussed the role of GPG in much more detail in section 2.5 of the GSOO.
Thanks. I'll need to get into the details here. Cheers.
Sure. No worries.
It's all in the detail. Also, okay, did that answer all of your question, Dominic?
Just the second question there
yeah,
is,
I thought so.
In respect to that peaking and the peak gas on GPG and the likes, and obviously there's an impact of that associated with batteries being developed to take up some of that peak or potentially some of that peak. But there's still the big issue is, do we have capacity in the infrastructure to deliver that peak in those years? And if not, does that actually mean we need to expand the capacity of the DBNGP in the southern part?
Thanks very much for the question, Dominic. So there's a few parts to this. We did some supplementary, so we do our own gas infrastructure adequacy assessment, but this year we've supplemented that with some of the modelling and insights from AGIG. And so when we plugged in our demand forecasts, we did see some, peak demand days where there could be potential shortfalls. Having said that, though, based on what's actually currently contracted, you wouldn't see those sort of same gas shortfall days that we saw under the modelling. So that's one thing to say, that through the period there is uncertainty, and so it's not a given that infrastructure expansion would be required. The other thing is, through this, there's also the opportunity to look at, what other levers could be pulled across electricity and gas sector as well. So whether it's, we haven't modelled sort of the change to dual fuel generation or using the demand side programs. So that's something that could further reduce this, or looking at some sort of, whether it be a gas demand side, program or something like that. So I would say that whilst infrastructure expansion would be one of the options if we are to see that demand materialise, it's not the only one.
Cool. So build more batteries, eh?
Yeah, potentially. So as I think Chris mentioned, we assume the batteries are 6-hour batteries. So we haven't looked at if those batteries were to be longer duration batteries.
Thanks all.
Great. Thanks for your questions, Dominic. And Steve Lewis, you've got your hand up.
I do. Thanks for that. So the uncertainties you've listed on the forecast going forward, and one is around new supply. It seems that there's kind of, I haven't read the whole report, but there doesn't seem to be much commentary about the problems with getting approvals for new gas projects, and that's likely to cause significant delays. So just take the Northwest Shelf, for example, extension and the delay to investment there to bring in new gas, and other projects on the East Coast, the Browse situation. It just seems to me that if you're going to forecast and say there's a structural shortage, you really need to hit hard what's causing that, which is delay to projects essentially through approvals, and maybe that needs to be sort of put up in lights a bit more.
Whether either Katie or Alex wants to comment on how these sorts of assumptions flow through into the report.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in there, Aidan. Yeah, I think it's more, it's probably more of a comment than a question, sort of around sort of messaging of what we sort of, as you say, Steve, sort of put up in lights. I think from a modelling perspective, yes, you know, those forecasts, there are, in particular, those uncertain projects that are contingent on approvals progressing. There is, and again, this is probably not sort of up there in lights as per you mentioned, but we do in our supply chapter talk about sort of in some of the footnotes to the supply table where certain projects are contingent on approvals progressing. So it is certainly in there as an assumption for those uncertain projects to progress. But take your point on perhaps that could be made more front and centre. Thanks, Steve.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Scott Ashton, you've got another question. I'm not sure if your microphone's working yet. No, I don't think it is. So Scott's got a question around the quantity or quantification of how many projects actually comprise uncertain. Again, yep. Alex, yep.
Yeah. So there's a few projects in there. We've got Browse, Equus, Corvus, Ocean Hill. You can find those in, I believe it's figure 20 of the WA GSOO.
Brilliant. Okay, we've got one last question from Elise Fryer. Elise is asking around Waitsia again, Waitsia. Elise, do you want to speak to this? Okay. So Elise has asked if we can confirm that the return of Waitsia gas is included in the domestic supply forecasts.
Yeah, that's confirmed.
Yeah,
that's correct.
And another question from Piers around, again, Waitsia. Piers, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, it was just, I guess, clarifying that previous point. I understood from the written report that the return of the so-called borrowed gas is included, but I was wondering whether that is in addition to the domestic market obligation, or will those returns of gas, borrowed gas, be met from the domestic market obligation?
Yep, I can provide you with my understanding, but it's probably, if we do have somebody from perhaps either Vivek or Sean on the line from Deed, it would be more probably appropriate for them to answer this question in regards to compliance.
Yeah, look, with that prior notice, I'd prefer not to put our colleagues outside of AMO on the spot in answering that question. So, if you are online, then I would encourage you to either reach out to Piers, or for Piers to reach out to people at Deed to respond. If you don't have their contact details, would be more than happy to provide you with a point of contact.
But what is AMO's assumption?
We don't forecast compliance in that way. We assume that it would, I would assume that it would not count towards DMO, but but we don't explicitly forecast compliance against the DMO in that way. But we
would make a big difference to the volumes that would be supplied. So I think it would have to be reflected either one way or the other in your supply forecast, but I can't work out which way at the moment.
Yep, that's correct. So we assume again that that any biogas will be paid back in addition. So that's our assumption. It doesn't count towards sort of the DMO itself.
Okay.
Katie, did you have a comment on that?
I was just going to pop in the chat just the response to a question we got in the last WA GCF that was published today. So I'll pop that in the chat now.
Okay, and we do have another question from Reese Morn. So follow up to Elise Fry's question, over what period of time the swap volumes expected to be returned in the forecast? So again, assuming that this relates to Waitsia. Alex, are you able to respond to that question?
Yes, yeah. So we assume that the Waitsia project will be so two parts to that answer. Will be fully dedicated to supplying the domestic gas market from the end of 2028, which is consistent with the end of the first term under the Waitsia State Agreement. In between now and 2028, we also assume return of borrowed gas or swaps.
Okay, thank you, Alex. Okay, well, with that, it's 4 minutes to 12, and we don't have any additional questions in the chat. So with that, we might bring it to a close for today. Just by way of closeout, of course, I imagine you've already seen that the 2025 WA GSOOs and supporting material, such as the appendices, has already been published on our website this morning. And the gas forecasting portal has been updated with consumption peak demand data for 2025 from the GSOO. Importantly, we do note that, as Mia pointed out, there was a deferral of 2 days in the release of the GSOO and this webinar, and because of that, we imagine that a few people may have gone on leave either today or are soon, and so depending on interest, we may hold a follow-up forum so that other people can ask questions in relation to the release of this important document, but they will be subject to interest from stakeholders. And we do have an email contact, which I've referred to previously there on the slide. Would be very happy to hear from you and take your additional questions. Katie, do you have any other comments before we close out today?
Just to thank all of you that have engaged in the gas consultative forums along the way as we've developed the GSOO this year, and also a big thank you to the team that have prepared it. It's been a really significant uplift in extending the outlook to 20 years and also maturing our infrastructure adequacy assessment. So thank you to the team, and of course thank you as well to those at DEED and at AGIG as well for their support as well through the development of the GSOO. Thank you all and have a fantastic end to 2025. We look forward to engaging with you again in 2026.
Thank you all, and we'll see you next year. See ya.